Hey everyone, it is Wednesday, and you know what that means. Yes, that means we bring back Anna Kelly. How you doing, Anna?
I'm great today, Michael. Good to see you.
Oh, this is going to be fun. I have two topics that I've been waiting to ask you about. So let's set up the first one. You ready?
I'm ready.
So I don't know if you've seen it in your YouTube feed, but my YouTube feed has been dominated by what I'll call new investors, meaning less than 5 years, talking about an imminent collapse in the single family market in the United States. One of them, who's of Rich Dad fame, talked about 40 to 50% drop in 2021. Uh,
Wow.
and I put out probably 3 videos already going, this is like mathematically impossible. This is a null result. This can't happen. But I realized I could be wrong. So
Yeah.
I propose to you, do you see any scenario where we could see a 40 to 50% collapse in single family homes for the nation? I'm not talking urban cities. I'm talking national numbers by the end of 2021.
No.
Awesome.
Woohoo, we're on the same page with that
Woo,
one.
I was nervous. Because we could break it down, but the answer is no. I mean, it's just no.
Right.
For lots of reasons.
Right.
Instead of leading the witness, why don't you just drop a couple? Because I'm sure they're the same ones I've come up with. But again, I've asked you this question cold. So explain what you were thinking, why you came up with no, like 0%.
Sure. So let me say, I think that there could be some softening in real estate
Mm-hmm.
prices, certain markets for sure. And we've talked a little bit about that,
Mm-hmm.
especially in some of these bigger cities,
Yeah,
these Northeast cities, the cities that have had, pretty heavy handed responses to COVID that might have
absolutely.
increased taxes. And so we're already seeing a mass migration kind of south
Mm-hmm.
for certain pockets. So I
Yep,
think that certain pockets of the economy, housing is going to struggle, but
totally
not
agree.
wide swath, across the United States. We are in a recession,
Mm-hmm.
we're formally in a recession,
Mm-hmm.
and the average recession lasts about 2 years, and then you start to come back to recovery. So
Mm-hmm.
while this could take a little bit longer because of COVID, and it's yet to see how many layoffs we're going to have and how, things like that, people always need, a place to live.
Yep.
And one of the things that's different this time than the last housing crisis and economic crisis, the Great Recession, is that at that time, so many people were underwater on their mortgages,
Sad
and
stuff.
they had very high interest rate mortgages. At this point, interest rates have been so low for the last 10 years
Mm-hmm.
that most people are in payments that work for most families.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think you're going to see this mass foreclosure like you did in '09. And housing values have gone up quite a bit, over the last several years. So I don't think most people are and as long as they have jobs in some capacity or
Mm-hmm.
even unemployment, like we
Mm-hmm.
have had this, souped up unemployment since COVID, most people are going to be able to afford their mortgages.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of that, though, that I think is really important is the fact that because of COVID, the US basically said you got a blank check to stop your mortgage payments if you
Yeah.
need to. And so instead of going into foreclosure, the government's trying to do anything they can to keep people in their homes.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not selling those homes,
Mm-hmm.
they're in mass, the values aren't going to tank significantly because there's not this swooping of sales and homes
Mm-hmm.
that suddenly there's so much supply, so little demand
Mm-hmm.
that the price is crash 40 to 50%. I just don't see that happening given interest rates, given what the government's doing to stop foreclosures and given unemployment checks.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, again, if you want to talk about real estate softening and you want to say over the next 4 or 5 years, we can have that discussion, right? But there are, I mean, again, why did I just forget his name? He's the Rich Dad guy, Ken McElroy. Yeah, Ken
Oh,
McElroy,
okay. Yeah.
40 to 50% in 2021. I'm like, that just can't happen. I mean, it's 0% chance, right? For all the reasons. First off, I mean, there's so many reasons, right? You've talked about one of them already. People have equity, right? Even if you bought your house 2 years ago, you have equity. The thing about these forbearance requests is it has nothing to do with equity. It's can you make your mortgage payment? right? You
Right.
could have had your house for 28 years and have 2 years left on the mortgage, and you
Right.
could ask for forbearance, right?
Right.
There's no criteria. So we've taken a huge swath of supply off the market because, again, I don't know what the percentage is. People will say there's 4 million people in forbearance, 3.5, 4 million, whatever. There's a large percentage of those people that will come out of it okay, right? They got another job because, again, the government's giving them a year
Right.
to get a job.
Right.
So I don't know, half will be okay. Then you look at the other half and go, okay, most of them have equity. So yes, they could be sellers, but they're not going to be a foreclosure or short sale. You don't do a short sale if you have equity, people. That's not how this process works.
Right.
And then
Right.
yes, there will be some pain. There is no question that this will cause some pain. But I think it will be disproportionately urban centric, like San
Yeah.
Francisco, New York, for all the reasons that you talk about.
I do too. And one of the other things that we have to remember is after the forbearances, then the Fed came back and said, oh, by the way, when that's done, you've got to figure out a way to work them out.
Yeah,
You
put them a
can't just
second, all
say,
these, yeah.
yeah, you can't just call them due. So the banks have to either help add the payments to the back end that you missed or modify your payment in some way. So basically the government's not going to let these banks just mass foreclose on people. They're going to say, you got to work it out. And that's going to save people,
Yeah.
a lot of people from,
Not everyone, but lots of people.
yeah, it's going to help a lot of people. And again, I think just like we had pockets, pre 2008 that had massive growth. I mean, Las Vegas, Silicon Valley, parts of Florida and California and New York, and those values really tanked significantly.
Yeah.
They were significantly overheated compared to the rest of the United States.
Agreed.
And we still have some of that in some of those pockets. But for the most part, there's been this kind of steady growth over the last couple of years.
This way.
That's fairly gradual. And to your point, for those that are still working, they should be able to refinance and cash out some equity. For those that are on unemployment for a long time, or maybe lose jobs where jobs are fleeing a certain area,
right. You have
like
to move,
we saw, when GM left, you might have areas that these people can't get jobs again. They're going to have to leave. And so in those pockets where, employers leave permanently that were a big employer for that area, you might see, some pain, and it could be big pain. In those areas.
There's no question. We could have some cities down 40%. No problem. I have no problem saying that's possible.
Maybe New York City,
Yeah, but
I
not
just
national.
see it nationwide. I really don't.
Yeah. The other thing that I want people to appreciate, again, Anna and I have been doing this almost 20 years each. So we were buying pre-crash. We saw the crash up close and personal.
Yes.
We saw what banks were doing and not doing. And so you got 40 years plus here in this video, not 5 years and all you've known is an up market. The other thing we've said, but I just want to clearly call it out, is banks are fundamentally acting different this time versus last time. Last time it was, I won't even talk to you until you're seriously delinquent, right?
Right.
So you don't pay for 90 days and then you start getting phone calls.
Yes.
Now they're like, dude, go to my website, click this little box, and you got 90 days, no mortgages. I mean, they're just entirely different process.
Right. And two other things that are a little bit different. So one is the Fed is fully committed not to raising interest rates for at least a couple of years. But not only that, and I don't remember if we talked about this before, but essentially after the last crash, because so many banks were giving loans that maybe they shouldn't have been giving, basically the Sarbanes-Oxley's rules came in place, and the Fed essentially told banks, hey, you always have to keep a certain percentage in reserves for all the debt on your books. And basically with the CARES Act, the Fed changed that rate to 0. So banks are being encouraged, don't worry about how much reserves you have, just keep lending money to keep the economy afloat. And the Fed's, lending to them at uber cheap, almost 0 rate, so that they can keep giving loans. And so while credit may tighten, and banks do tighten in response to a recession, if you still have a decent job, you're going to have a pretty good chance of being able to refinance your mortgage.
And this is why I'm seeing a dominant owner acquisitions, right? Owner occupied purchases. It is because of that. What do you want to lend today? I want to lend to the first time buyer. I want going from renter to owner. And because the government's going to buy that loan, right? You look at anything that's exploding, it's government buying first time loans.
Right.
So that's an investable trend, and that doesn't turn off overnight. I mean, it's just, these things don't happen. So
Right. And even when private buyers and, hedge funds
mhm.
said, hey, we're nervous about buying mortgage-backed securities, what did the Fed do? And they became a mass buyer of
I'll buy
mortgage-backed
them.
securities. They're like, we're going to keep the market. You
Yeah.
keep lending and we'll be buying,
Yeah.
on the back end. So I really believe and I'm hopeful that that is going to stop a lot of the bleeding.
Yeah.
And again, I still believe prices are going to soften a little bit
Sure.
across the country because we're in a recession,
Yep.
but I don't think it's going to be anywhere on the means of 40 to 50%, maybe
In
10
a,
or 15%
yeah.
in a lot of areas. If that, it
Yeah.
really just depends on the resiliency of that local economy.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll point on this, and then we'll get to a happier topic, is the foreclosure process in a judicial versus non-judicial, I can't even say that word, state. There's a timeline involved, right?
Yes.
Let's just talk about California, right? So right now you can have forbearance basically up till March of 2021, right? In 90-day chunks. In the CARES Act, you can have it up to 1 year.
Sure.
So, okay, go all the way to the end of March 31st. So now it's April. You are technically current April 1st. So this is how the process works, folks. You have to be 4 months late before a notice of default can be filed. So that goes from April, May, June, July. So August 1st. The soonest an NOD could be filed. And NOD is filed August 1st. The soonest that can go to the courthouse is 60 days. So now we're August, September, now we're into October. There's a 21-day period for there. So now we're into November. Again, no delay in the process. The soonest foreclosed inventory could hit the market in California would be in November. And if anybody thinks they're going to do foreclosures and kick people out in Thanksgiving and Christmas, you're not paying attention. That is not going to happen.
Yeah.
So even if there was just a wave of non-payments, you wouldn't see that till 2022. Just timeline, right?
Right.
Just crazy. All right. So sorry, folks, if you're looking for a deal. And the reason I think this is bad and the reason I'm tackling it is a lot of people now are saying, great, I'm going to wait. I'm like, no, you need to learn your market, people. See what's going on because your market is going to be different. Don't look at Ken McElroy or all these other idiots who've only been doing this for 5 years and give yourself permission to do nothing. That's what happened last time. That's why I was buying hand over fist in 2010 because all you idiots weren't doing anything. You didn't learn your market.
Yeah. And I think, two things. So I think, there are deals to be made in every market. And
Yes.
I think that's your point. In every market, you can find where there is still opportunity. And maybe you have to shift your market and research other markets.
Maybe.
Or maybe you find a way to creatively make a deal out of a deal, even if you're paying more than what you think you should.
Yeah.
If prices come down in a year or two and stay down for 2 or 3, if you're a long-term buy and hold buyer, it really doesn't matter that you paid a little more because you're top of the market in 2020 than you would have paid in 2022 if you're not planning on selling until 2030 or 2040. So, that's why we shouldn't just stop buying. But be careful not to overpay if you're paying for something that is significantly overheated. If you're in one of those markets that's like, well, this is really overheated.
Yeah.
You don't want to get yourself, levered into something, highly levered into something where you think the values are going to come down significantly during your hold period.
Exactly.
So for those that are looking for like flips and they want to be in and out, or they're like, hey, I want to own something for 2 to 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Then yes, you might want to be a little more patient if you don't think 3 or 4 years from now the market's going to at least be where you need it to be in order to sell it.
Yeah.
So there's some caution, in overpaying always, but you have to take the long game approach. You have to look at how long am I going to own this, and do I care if there's some cyclical?
Real estates are not stocks
for a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the last thing I'll point out here is, again, during the Great Recession, again, just back to the fact that 40 or 50% is not mathematically possible. The fastest drop we saw in the Great Recession in the hardest hit markets, Central Valley, Inland Empire, ones that were really crushed. I mean, we're talking down 75% peak to trough, was 2% a month. You don't get 40% a year, 2% a month when you can't even start the foreclosures until November. I mean,
right.
It's just mathematically impossible.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about something more interesting. And I actually don't know if we're going to agree on this one, which should be fun. let's pretend it's 2025, right? So we go through this whole 4 years of another president or the existing president, right? So we're talking 2025, 4 years, 4 months away. So I have some questions. This again, single family home, so we can get our baseline cool. Let's talk nationally, right? So today, let's call median home 320 nationally. What do you think the average home is in 2025? Do you think it's up 10%, even down 10%? Where would you put it? Because again, I think you're right. I think there's a little slow patch in there somewhere. But
Yeah.
I think to your point, the recessions are average 2 years, so we should probably be coming out of it, maybe even be a year or so out of it.
Yeah.
Where do you see home values in 2025 if today's 320?
So I'll say this. My predictions haven't always been accurate.
Mine
You know,
neither.
like you think, okay, after 08, 09, I thought we would bounce back quicker. I thought interest rates would go up a lot higher. And as
Oh,
soon
yeah.
as they started to trickle up, like there was rumblings and then they had to lower them again. So, it's hard to really, really, really predict out 5 years, but I would
Sure.
say this. If past is indicative of future,
Yeah.
let's say this recession, because it's bad, it's worse than
Yeah.
the last recession, which was bad, just in terms of the number of people unemployed and the number of layoffs.
For
Okay.
sure.
Let's say it lasts 3 years instead of 2.
Okay.
A recovery period starts and lasts about 3 years. So
Okay.
if we're down for 2 and start to recover for 3,
Mhm.
then we're probably close to back to normal, back to where we are now.
Okay.
If not quite there in certain markets, I think this last one, it took about 7 years to be back up in that like beyond growth and, beyond recovery into true growth.
I see what
So
you're
you've
saying.
got
Yep.
recession, recovery, you've got growth.
Yep.
So it took about 7 years to get back up to where you're really at the growth cycle.
Mhm.
And we're considered at the top of that growth cycle before this crash.
For
So
sure.
kind of at the height of the market. So does it take 7 or 8 years to get back to today in most markets? I think it could. But I think for those that are hit hard for the next 2 to 3 years, they're going to be pretty well close back to where we are 2 years beyond that. So 5 years, maybe we're down nationally 5 to 10%.
So you negative down.
From today's values, yeah, I do. Because the reality is there's been a major stagnation of growth when consumers can't spend, and you can't negate the power of our psyche and our confidence level. And
consumer confidence. Yep.
Consumer confidence, through mass layoffs. And again, in a lot of big cities where a lot of corporations they're laying people off. And it's been pretty quiet other than on certain like financial news sites, but a lot of companies are closing down, retail centers closing down.
For sure.
Certain sectors are hit harder. And I think consumers are still like, oh no, am I going to lose my job? Because I haven't yet, but what if? I was in that place when AIG almost went under in 2008. And it was like, we got so tight, we cut cable. I didn't have cable for 10 years. We're not spending on anything we don't need to spend on because we need to save. We need to be protectionary in case my company does lay me off. And so I think that there's still a lot of that consumer shaking where it's like, how long is it going to be before COVID's over and we're back to normal? And I don't have to worry about my company laying off. And low rates basically get us to buy houses and to buy cars and things like that. But I think consumer psyche will be shaken and they're going to have a memory that's going to take a few years before they feel like we're back to normal. And, and I just think that we can't negate that. So I do think in 5 years, our values nationwide will be a little less than what they are, but I think on the road to recovery and coming back.
Cool. Okay. All right. What about interest rates? And let's use the 30-year mortgage so we have something to talk about. Let's say today the average 30-year is 2.75%. Do you think interest rates, again, 5 years, right? The Fed's on record, nothing for 3 years, but do you see interest rates higher in 5 years?
If at all, slightly.
So we're talking.
And that's where I was wrong before. I thought rates were going to go up. And full disclosure, I paid to keep my rate at a certain rate that I thought, man, we're going to have inflation and rates.
I had one of those too.
And I paid like $3,000 to keep my rate higher than what it would have been if I just let it go to prime.
Yeah, I did that too once.
Stayed at like, I think it was like 5.25, and then it dropped to 3.25. And
Wow.
prime stayed at 3.25 forever.
Yeah.
So, since the last recession. So I think the Fed keeps interest rates extremely low to continue to try to boost consumer confidence,
Yeah.
to keep borrowing, to keep spending, and to help companies keep from having to close down because they can just keep borrowing to stay afloat. So
Yeah.
I tend to think rates, I think that the days of really high interest rates are over for a while.
Yeah. I think we could keep rates certainly under 3.5 for the next decade for sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really do too.
Yeah. All right. Then the next one I'm really big on is home ownership, right? I believe home ownership is the path to a better future for lots of people, even if that's the only asset or real estate you buy. I looked it up yesterday. Let's call home ownership today 66%. Do you see the trend, which at least seems like renters are becoming owners, raising that in 5 years? Do you think we're higher than 66%, or do you think this is a blip and it turns around?
I don't think we're higher in 5 years than what
Okay.
we are today. Again, though, so much of this, it's so hard to make a blanket statement
Yeah.
because every city and every state is truly so different.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with a millennial, age group and post-millennial age group who
Hmm.
have come out with six-figure debt. They
Yeah.
can't qualify for mortgages right now, even though rates are super, super low. When
Mhm.
you add in their car payment and you add in, their school loans,
Yeah.
many cannot.
Yeah.
And so
Debt to
right
income is
now,
wrong. Yeah.
there are more young adults in their 20s to young 30s that have moved back with their parents
I
than
saw that.
any other time since the Great Depression.
I saw
And
that.
so there is still this, high debt young adults who normally would be those coming in as first time home buyers who just flat out cannot, they don't have enough saved, and their debt to income ratio is too high for them to buy. So in that demographic, I think you still see a lot just renting till they can pay down that debt until
Mhm.
they start making higher incomes. And then that's the question, is when are those higher income jobs back? Because even though real estate values have gone up, consumer price index has gone up, wages have become, on an inflation adjusted basis, have become fairly
Mhm.
stagnant. And so, I think that there's more people renting longer. And also you have these younger people who still really enjoy lifestyle and not having to be tied down to one area,
For
because
sure.
what if they get married? What if they leave for another job? They enjoy renting. Now,
Mhm.
there's a pocket of that subset that says that's not true. We want to own a home. We just can't yet. So, I think 5 years from now, if the recession lasts 2 to 3, and rates stay low, but people still have good jobs, then I think you're going to start seeing people say, hey, it's time for us to start buying houses. If they can afford it now, they will. But I just don't know nationwide,
Okay.
if you still have as many homeowners.
Very cool. So now let's just flip it to our business. Because again, what I want people to realize is, yes, we have national opinions, but we also run our own businesses. And I don't care. I don't know how you want to answer this. You can actually choose not to if you want. But when you look at your business 5 years from now, um, I'm going to guess you have more units and more cash flow than you have today.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. That I'm sure about. I'm still buying. And because we are more of a renter nation right
Yeah.
now, and because a lot of older homeowners are deciding, I'm selling and
Yeah.
I want to downsize and I don't want a yard and I don't want, upkeep. And so you've got an older generation that's looking to get into more like independent living or apartment living,
Mhm.
and then these younger people that aren't. So you've always got a renter demographic and a renter market. So I'm very bullish on there continuing to be a need for people to rent.
Mhm.
Some by necessity, some by choice, and I'm going to continue to provide, housing for those people that want to rent.
So again, more units, more cash flow for Anna by 2025. Is it also fair? I'm going to tie conversations we've had from the past. You're probably leaning south in meaning more diversified.
Yes, my last 3 apartment acquisitions and the one that I'm under contract for now are Georgia and Texas. Also kind of looking in the Carolinas and in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I'll still continue to buy in Central PA. It's been a really strong, resilient market where a lot of New Yorkers and New Jerseyans are coming
Yeah.
down, and wanting to be here. But largely I'm looking for more properties in the South. Yes.
Very, very cool. Well, any other thoughts about 2025 you want to close out with?
I just think that we need to continue to play the long game. We don't know year by year what's going to happen, but the fundamentals of real estate are the same. You try to buy at a good price point. You try to have some upside in what you're buying. So you're not buying something and just sitting on it. For the most part, you're looking for things that you're going to be able to create cash flow. And we don't have to be super, super concerned. If we're buy and hold investors, we don't have to be super concerned with in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, is it up or down? You're buying the cash flow, you're buying the income stream, you're not buying the value per se. And when you can cash out your equity, you can cash out your equity. So I buy to say, here's my cash flow. I think that by year 2 or 3 it's going to be worth a little more and I can cash out the equity, but I'm not depending on that because I don't know 3 years is it going to happen. Right. What it is going to do for me is say, I'm not going to get into bridge debt where I have to depend on the market being higher and at a certain rate in order to get out and be okay and not lose my shirt. So when you're talking about short-term loans or short-term property holds, a value add deal churning, that's when it's much more important to really predict where we be in year 3 or year 5. But if I'm buying for a 5 to 6 year hold, I think we're back up at a recovery at that point. And if I can't sell then, I have to be able to say, I'm gonna extend my exit for another year or 2 and just plan on 5 being possibly 7. Cool. But don't stop buying just because we don't know what the economy is going to do.
Awesome. Well, Anna, thank you very much for this. This is always fun. Again, 0% chance we have a 40% crash next year, right?
100% zero.
100% zero. Well, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Anna. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much.